Your life will always matter more to me than my own.
I'm still bawling with how great I found Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and that's what I'll be talking about in this movie review. If you haven't checked out my Mission Impossible films ranked from worst to best video, check it out. I'll insert the link over here because I will be placing the 7th installment in that list. So check out by the end of this video where this movie lands. I want to talk first, before going into the review, again how much I love the franchise as it is. So I had so much expectations coming in for Dead Reckoning Part 1. And to be honest, it checks all of the boxes. But let's talk first about the plot. This feels like a story that is so familiar that I've seen in other action movies. And to be honest, I didn't find it as much of a bad thing as I thought I would, despite it being very familiar. Because when a movie does something that's been done before, but you do it not necessarily in a different way, but in a way that's self-explanatory, that's contextualized in this particular movie as it does, that's where I appreciate it. Despite it being very familiar, I loved how there was a different treatment altogether in a way when it came to the AI technology, when it came to this threat. The threat here in itself, the AI, was the biggest villain. And I loved it, how it's an immaterial thing, how it's something that's not a human person kind of villain, but you have escalated the stakes. You've made things really scary in terms of dealing with AI, and that's what this movie does. It pushes the bounds, it pushes the limits of our main characters, and I love that about this film. Again, it feels very familiar, but also not in a bad way. It's weird to really explain it because I know I've seen a similar plot time in, time out. It wasn't new, it wasn't innovative, it wasn't creative in a different way. It didn't try to repackage things. It was just as simple as it was, but it made sense. It worked for some reason. And the story in itself, although it dives into Ethan Hunt's past, we get to see even little snippets of what his life was before even the very first Mission Impossible film. The story in itself has a way of creating enough tension, creating enough emotional impact that you'd want to watch and finish this till the very end. I was actually surprised with the running time of 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I'll talk about this right now. I didn't feel it. I actually was so glued, was so hooked into every moment in this movie that I didn't even need a bathroom break. I didn't even need to go out of my seat, and my bladder was full after all of it, but I had to sit down, I had to watch, I had to be glued into every single thing that was happening. In a way, it was still bitin. Hindi naman siya bitin in the sense, and I'll talk about the ending later on, but it was bitin because I just wanted more and more, and not in a bad way. What this movie does is what I've been talking about in my other videos. It's a long running time and you can still make it work in such a way that you enjoy every moment. I also love in how this movie didn't feel segmented. I've mentioned this also in other videos where action films or films in general feel like they're chapters, there's segments, and now I don't necessarily, again, say this is a bad thing to have chaptered moments, but this felt seamless. It felt more like there wasn't like chapter 1 in this location, chapter 2 is here, chapter 3. It just felt like everything was smooth and it transitioned beautifully from one moment to another that complemented everything. This was just restrained enough that I loved every moment, and particularly that ending sequence with the train. Oh man, I was going crazy for each and every moment where Ethan and Grace, I think her name was, played by Hayley Atwell, was jumping from one cart to another, and there was just things that were happening in each cart that was just amazing and fresh. It kept everything alive, and it was just absolutely brilliant. Majority of the cast just really was amazing. Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise, 60 years old, doing all of these stunts, still amazing. He drives this film definitely. Loved Sean Pegg, I love Van Rhymes, I love all of them. Highlights here, two particular actresses. Hayley Atwell. Hayley Atwell showed up. I mean, I loved how she brought a different atmosphere to this movie that I haven't seen before. There were funnier moments this time around, and I think it could be connected to her, to be honest. The inexperienced, the almost out of her element kind of character. I loved her here. Another one that stood out for me in a good way was Palm Clemente, who played Mantis in the Guardians of the Galaxy. She was also, like, I felt she could have been the villain here. She could have played and just went with it. And she was fantastic. She felt like a sore thumb at the first parts of the movie. Like, I felt like she would have been perfect in a John Wick movie instead. And there were moments that this film felt like that. I couldn't stop but think, hey, this feels like a John Wick movie. It's a different side to her. It's a different side to her that I just absolutely love, that I want to see more. She didn't have any lines, and that was amazing. She had a couple French lines towards the end, but then she was fantastic nonetheless. Even with her just facial expressions, it was just amazing. Now, the human villain, the human elemented villain here was one of the more underwhelming parts. And this is one of my biggest problems with this film. And I think it's also because I compare him to like Henry Cavill and Philip Seymour Hoffman. They were, again, one of my favorite villains in the MI franchise. But I felt this guy was a Bond villain wannabe. But one thing this film does is it falls in that category of movies nowadays that split like a finale or the last installment into two. Now, I've been doing some research. This may not necessarily be the last Mission Impossible film. This may be the send-off for Ethan Hunt, but not necessarily the Mission Impossible franchise. Now, that being said, this is again part one of two. I didn't necessarily feel that it was that way. It's enough. I mean, you're not like hanging on to something and you're waiting for the next moment. It's not like it's a huge cliffhanger. That's what I love about it. It's a clean break. It doesn't feel like a series break like that and it stops midway and you're like, frustrated. I didn't feel any frustration at all with how this film ended. I was already expecting it because it's part one. I would have understood it, but I loved it all the more because it didn't go that way. This film rating, I give it a 9 out of 10. Very simple. Don't have to rethink it twice. 9 out of 10. Just by a small margin, Fallout still beats Dead Reckoning Part 1, but Dead Reckoning Part 1 sits comfortably at number 2. I do highly recommend that you check out Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 while it's still in theaters here in the Philippines. That's it for this video, guys. Don't forget to make every day into an adventure. Medyo umuulan nowadays, so please stay safe. God bless. Peace out.